I recently uploaded a reel of an approach flown during low visibility operation or CAT3 weather on my Instagram page. In the description I explained that this is a CAT3 Bravo approach flown down to the runway. No one would believe me that this is possible. One very fine gentleman even accused me of illegal procedures and said he would never fly with my airline, or for that matter any kind of E-jet, as it is extremely dangerous. And he made it clear that he was an experienced 787, 747 and 777 pilot, so he must be true, right? Obviously it is a completely standard operating procedure to fly a manual CAT3 approach, as it is stated in the operating manual of this jet. To make this possible, the Embraer has a very special feature that not a lot of jets have. Today I will explain to you why the E-jet is one of the only jets that make it possible, if not equipped with Autoland feature, to be manually land in CAT3 weather conditions. This is Flo, welcome to Foredeck. What's an Embraer? The E-jet is a Brazilian-made aircraft. After the Bombardier C-Series was bought by Airbus, it is pretty much the only aircraft company still competing with Airbus and Boeing. In the global market of jets with 100 to 150 seats, the company estimates its market share to be at a respectable 30%. Next to small executive jets and military aircraft, they are probably most known for their E-jet family, ranging from the 175, which is about 80 seats, to about 140 seats on the 195 E2. It is a lovely jet with high automation throughout the whole systems and modern avionics. When ordering the Embraer E-jet initially, the operator had to choose between an option with Autoland and an option without an Autoland. Without the Autoland function, a jet is typically limited to a CAT1 operation, which can be very limiting in operating scheduled air service. Even if the weather is good enough for a CAT1 approach, which it is most of the time, you will sometimes have to take on fuel for more than one alternate, and this will be painfully costly over time for a fleet of 17 jets. Why would someone not take the Autoland function? The Autoland mode requires extra rudder servos, as they must, in case of an engine fail, compensate for the yawing moment. Those extra servos require maintenance, and the cost of acquiring the jet is also high, of course. How does an Autoland actually work? The following modes describe the functioning of an Autoland on the Embraer E-jet family. At 150 feet, the airplane aligns with the runway, transitioning from a crab to a side slip flying using rudder and aileron. 50 feet, the flare mode is engaged, which will provide a rate brake down towards the runway, which is also my key, the 50 call out, when I do the rate brake in a normal manual landing. 30 feet, the retard mode activates, which will retard the auto throttle down to minimum, which will then cause the spoiler activation and obviously a runway to touchdown on the runway. So typically the E-jets will always land with auto throttle on, as it is retarding by itself at about 30 feet. If you want to have the throttle retard higher, let's say at 50 feet, you can easily do that by just overriding the throttle down to the minimum detent, because it can always be overridden compared to the Airbus, of course. When the main gear has touched down, rollout guidance engages in maintaining the airplane on the sensor line with the help of the localizer. This will also work during a single engine approach. But what if you don't want the Autoland function because you're on a budget, but you also want to fly CAT3 approaches? Well, Embraer has thought about that. Introducing the head-up guidance system. The HGS, or head-up guidance system, is a different name for head-up display. A projector, or more specifically called a combiner, will project information on the glass right in front of the pilot and can be moved up or down in case it is not used. There's also a knob next to the glass where you can turn up or down the brightness, which is a feature we always use when we come down from the clouds, because typically the runway is very bright, and when you've flown into clouds where it's generally very dark in the cockpit and outside as well, then you will come down to the runway, which is very, very bright. You have to turn up the brightness knob as well on the head-up guidance system. During landing, there's also a declutter mode that will, at an altitude of about 1500 feet, remove the airspeed and the altitude band, and the HSI during the approach for even less scanning required by the pilot. The airspeed will then be monitored by the symbols next to the flight path symbol. They will show if you're right on your target speed and if you're accelerating or decelerating. So a very helpful feature. It maybe was weird at first when first flying the jet, but now when you're used to it, it's a very helpful feature, and it really reduces the amount of scanning you have to do. And if you really want to see your tapes, you can always look down on your PFD. How a Category 3 approach is flown. To fly a Category 3 approach, radial altimeter minimums will be used. The reason why for CAT3 radio altimeter minimums are used and for CAT1 baro minimums is that during a CAT1 minimum, you will still be over terrain and radio minimums will not be accurate. During a CAT3 approach, at the minimum, you will already be over the runway, so using the radio altimeter is now an accurate representation of the height of the wheels above the ground. During flare, which starts at about 50 feet, just like in the Autoland, our flight director, or solid ball that we will use to capture glide slope and localizer during the whole approach, will then transition to a so-called flare mode, where the ball will move up on the HGS and you have to follow it with your flight path symbol. And this will cause the airplane to flare, even with relatively poor visibility. So this is why you have that flare ball. The pilot flying will then try to capture the ball, which will lead to a firm but good touchdown on the runway and right on the center line. Pilot monitoring will closely monitor parameters like airspeed, altitude, glide slope guidance, and will call out any deviations to the pilot flying. Depending on the airline, sometimes only the captain gets to fly CAT3 approaches, as if you want to fly those approaches, you have to do regular training in the simulator, which is typically only done by the captain. Pros and cons of an head-up guidance system. If the HGS is so good, why doesn't every airline use them? The most obvious pro is that a HUD minimizes head downtime. If you fly an ILS approach using the head-up guidance system, you will constantly be looking right at the runway, as your quote-unquote flight director or flight path vector represents the exact direction in which you are going. And this is especially helpful during a visual approach, which I've in real life done before during my landing training. During a visual approach, you can set a 3-degree glide slope reference line on your HGS and you will physically see a runway. So you can move your flight path vector or angle directly in the 3-degree line. Then you will be descending with 3 degrees, and also you can move the symbol exactly on the runway, so you will be exactly approaching the runway with a 3-degree descent angle, which is the exact condition you want for a visual approach. So what are the cons? Pilots are not used to them, and once they are used to using a HUD, it will be quite a challenge going back and relearning the traditional scanning techniques. That's why I still like to look at my PFD every now and then. Additionally, the lack of color coding for different modes, or even basic blue and brown representing the horizon, makes it harder to see at a glance what kind of modes or even attitude you are in. That's why I personally like to use the PFD for. Now you know everything about HUDs and HGS. If you have any experience of flying a HUD or using an HGS, please write it down in the comments below. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. I will try to answer them as best as I can. Until the next one, stay safe.